Imagine it's a sweltering day in the year 1180 and you're desperately thirsty. Not the casual thirst that sends someone today to a faucet without thinking, but real thirst. The parched, dusty throat of someone who's been laboring since sunrise through a city filled with smoke and mud, carrying things, moving things. So you do what everyone in London does. You find the nearest well, drop a bucket into that darkness, pull it back up, water streaming, and you drink. Nothing happens that day, nothing the morning after. But somewhere in that simple swallow could be something that will drain your body completely within 7 days, pull the water out of you faster than you can replace it, and kill a child lying beside you before 30 days pass. That's the unsettling reality about water in medieval London. Not poison, exactly. A gamble. Over the next hour, we'll travel through London's streets in 1180 and learn where 25,000 people actually found their water, what was mixed in with it, how they assessed it without even knowing germs were real, and why what killed them was rarely what they thought was responsible. This is what life looked like in 1180. This is why London's water was deadly. But first, we have to get past the story you already believe, because it's blocking our way. You've heard it many times. Medieval people refused to drink water because it was filthy and poisonous. They drank beer and wine instead, from childhood until death. That's why all of Europe spent centuries slightly intoxicated. It's a great story. You see it in documentaries, in schools, all over the web. And it's completely false. Medieval people drank water all the time, from wells, springs, streams, rivers. They gave it to their kids and livestock. They cooked with it. They fermented with it. They bathed in it. When they wrote about it, they treated it as normal and often excellent. The truth is far stranger and far more disturbing, because the actual situation wasn't that medieval Londoners stayed away from water. It was that they drank it daily, fully aware that certain water made people sick while other water didn't, but they couldn't figure out why. They were caught in a game whose rules they couldn't see. Remember that part, because everything that follows depends on it. Let's set the scene. 1180. Henry II holds England's throne, a restless king who owns territory from Scotland to the Pyrenees and spends most of his time riding between his properties. London isn't yet his capital in the modern sense because kings haven't stopped travelling and Westminster exists separately upstream. But London is without question the kingdom's greatest city. Standing on the north bank of the Thames, enclosed by walls the Romans constructed and the Normans reinforced, with the stone fortress the Conqueror built looming harsh and square at its east end, and the massive Cathedral of St. Paul at its west end. Within those walls are maybe 25,000 people, possibly more, crammed into winding alleys, wood-framed houses, thatched dwellings, workshops, burial grounds, and trading areas. Most buildings have no glass windows. The streets aren't paved the way we'd recognize them. There are no underground drains, no sewers, no pipes, no water taps, no system for bringing water to homes. Every single bit of water anybody in this city needs has to be taken, moved, and carried by hand from somewhere. Recognize that one point and half of what happens next makes sense. And now comes our first stroke of luck. We don't have to guess what Londoners in these exact years believed about their water. Someone documented it. William Fitz Stephen was his name. In these same years, in the decade of our account, he wrote up a description of London as a preface to his biography of Thomas Becket, the archbishop he served and whose killing he saw. It's among the most powerful descriptions of any medieval European city. Written by someone who genuinely loved it, he celebrates the stream, the marketplaces, the restaurants along the riverfront, the competitions young men had on frozen ice during winter. When he discusses water, he doesn't paint a picture of disgusting, undrinkable ruin. He describes something almost like a celebration. In the area around London, he notes, there are remarkable fountains where the water is pure and refreshing and transparent, moving across gleaming stones. He lists 3 specifically: Holywell, Clerkenwell, and St. Clement's Well. And here's the remarkable part. He tells us that when it gets warm in the evening, groups of schoolboys and teenagers from London travel out to these springs to relax and drink, not running away from water, but deliberately going to enjoy it with friends as part of a pleasant summer evening. Hold on to that picture, because it teaches something critical. It shows that Londoners had a definite grasp of what made good water and where they could get it, and that good water was valuable enough to walk outside the city for. These location names persist in London even now, written on street signs that millions of people see every day without noticing. Clerk's Well, the Well of Clerks, where the local clergy assembled. Holywell, the Holy Well. These weren't dumps or sewers. They were spring-fed basins on the higher zones north and east of the barrier, where pure water bubbled up naturally from stone and earth, icy and transparent and flowing. And here's the critical detail. They sat beyond the city walls. Not coincidental, not minor. It's the entire core of what we're discussing. The water Londoners celebrated was water that hadn't flowed through London. The farther you got from the masses, the better the water was, and they all recognized this, though none could have described the mechanism. The problem wasn't water itself, it was people. What 25,000 humans do to the ground beneath them. Now shift your attention to the major river, the Thames. The Thames in 1180 isn't the river in today's photos. It's broader, shallower, unhurried, and much more dynamic. No embankments constrain it into a narrow passage. So when the tide goes out, it spreads across wide stretches of silt and vegetation, and when it comes in, it pushes against the banks and staircases. Being tidal here means the ocean travels up the estuary twice each day, driving inland. So the water at London is brackish, salty enough at high tide to taste the salt, getting fresher as the tide recedes and water flows from the east. And by today's standards, it's remarkably pure. Salmon populate the river. Eels exist in vast quantities. Lamprey arrive. Even porpoises swim up to the bridge, and fishermen in the riverside towns make their living from a river that later generations would destroy into a stinking corpse. Fitz Stephen celebrates the fish population. So here's your main water supply right at the base of every street, unlimited, free, and flowing past a city that has nowhere else to put what it needs to discard. Because that's the other role the Thames had, and you can't separate them. It was the city's disposal system and its water fountain at once. Everything London wanted to abandon went into the river or into waterways that flowed into it. bucket after bucket from latrines, sweepings from lanes, mud, animal manure, reeds, ash and filth, blood, organs and leather from slaughterhouses, rotting matter from fish traders, noxious liquid from tanning vats, colorant, ash and oil from countless manufacturing operations. And in 1180, no administrator is powerful or motivated enough to prevent any of it. The advantage for Londoners was that the river seemed to consume everything. Tide rose, tide fell, and the waste vanished, swept away to some place far from home. This is among the most ancient and human errors we commit, and we haven't entirely stopped. When something leaves your sight, you believe it's solved. So people disposed of refuse in the water and then withdrew drinking water from the same place slightly farther up if they were cautious, and just the most observant residents ever genuinely joined the dots. And if the river functioned as the city's back entrance, the Walbrook operated like internal plumbing. This stream is invisible now because London has engulfed it centuries ago, but in 1180, it still winds through the city, entering below the wall from the north and descending through London's middle, splitting the city into an eastern region and a western region. For Romans, it had been a genuine waterway with trade and industry lining its edges. For the Londoners of this period, it's less dramatic and more useful, a functioning waterway with crossing points, growing areas alongside it, and dwellings with their rear portions jutting out above the current. Which brings us to the exact issue. A waterway cutting through a packed city means every neighboring yard becomes tempting. It hauls away unwanted material, so you toss it in. In 50 or 100 years, the Walbrook becomes so clogged and disgusting that authorities simply capitulate and enclose it, making it a hidden sewer, eventually erasing it completely. By 1180, it's partway there, still flowing and still used by people, but by modern measures, it's something you wouldn't consider ingesting. And the fleet, that's where our story becomes genuinely troubling. This is the stream on London's western edge, flowing from Hampstead's elevated terrain through the valley where Farringdon Road runs today, past the Cathedral of St. Bride, and pouring into the Thames beneath the ridge holding Ludgate. In 1180, it remains an authentic waterway, broad enough at its lower reaches for vessels to journey upstream to Holborn, surrounded by open territory, farmland, grinding wheels, and residences of those requiring water for manufacturing. That final component creates difficulty because the manufacturing operations using the most water are simultaneously the operations generating the filthiest refuse, and they concentrate along the fleet like insects on rotten fruit. Tanneries, slaughterhouses, dyers, cloth processors, animal skinners, all need proximity to flowing water. All use it to carry away things you'd prefer not to consider. Our year's fleet isn't yet the notorious black waterway it becomes, the channel future Londoners will mock in poetry and eventually conceal beneath road surface. However, it's getting there. If you wish to grasp why water in medieval times could destroy you, you don't require visions of pestilence or sorcery. Simply position yourself downwind of a tanning facility for 15 minutes. Let's do exactly that, since it clarifies more than numbers. Tanning involves converting an animal's outer layer into sturdy leather resistant to decay. In the 1200s, it's a protracted, disagreeable, meticulous process. Freshly delivered animal pelts carry residue and material and coating. They get saturated to relax them. Pelts underwent treatment using lime or stale urine collected in vast quantities to dissolve the hair so it could be scraped off. The work took place in shallow pits filled with manure, particularly dog manure, deliberately accumulated and brought in because the microbes within it could break down skin tissue in ways nothing else available at that time could replicate. Next came submersion in water mixed with ground oak bark for tanning, a process lasting weeks or sometimes many months. At each transformation, the liquid residue, saturated with lime, urine, dung, and decaying animal matter, had nowhere to go but the stream. Consider this occurring at every tannery across London. Then add the fullers trampling cloth in vats of urine and the dyers dumping their used baths, and you start to grasp what actually flowed through the Western waterway. It was not some unknown hazard or vaporous sickness, just the routine waste of a working city draining downhill into water downstream communities would drink. The slaughterhouses were far worse, and everyone could tell because the smell carried from blocks away. London's main butchering ground sat near the old gate at the top of the Fleet Valley. This was no orderly operation with neat portions on clean surfaces. Living cattle arrived and were killed immediately in open streets, repeatedly each day. What remained when meat was taken was staggering quantities of blood, bone, skin, hooves, horn, and entrails. Part was sold, some was processed, but much was simply transported downhill and discarded into the Fleet, dumped in the Temple, or left in piles for rain to sweep away. Blood ran through the gutters. Summer brought flies in countless numbers. This repeated continuously, decade after decade, until approximately 2 centuries later, an English monarch would finally demand a halt, ordering that no animal be slaughtered within city limits and that all killing move to surrounding towns, because the contamination and odor had become unbearable to the entire kingdom. That royal decree reveals precisely how far standards had fallen. But in 1180, such concerns have never been imagined. Let us now look inside the walls at what the majority of Londoners drank daily, not the river, not the known springs, but something else. Wells. Dig beneath the surface almost anywhere north of the Temple and you strike water. For beneath London lies gravelly soil that keeps the water table near the top. Consequently, the city is filled with wells, hundreds of them. Some are communal, shared by an entire lane. Some belong to individual wealthy homes. Some are merely lined holes beside a workplace. A proper well represents significant labor, dug by hand, reinforced with stone or timber to prevent collapse, covered to keep out contamination and wandering children, fitted with rope and bucket or a winch apparatus. A makeshift well is simply a shallow depression that collects whatever seeps from the soil. Yet the water pulled up from either type looks identical to whoever draws it. Clear, cold, faintly sweet, utterly unremarkable. In 1180, there is no method by which a person holding up a bucket could determine if it would sustain a household or cause a child's death. And this is what stood only a short distance from many such wells. The most crucial detail in this entire account: the cesspit. London has no underground sewerage system. Each household addresses its waste in the only available manner, digging a pit beneath the courtyard or cellar, constructing a wooden privy above it, and using it until it becomes full. Once full, either a new pit is dug or someone is hired to empty it. Unpleasant night labor performed for substantial payment because only a narrow group would undertake such work. Some pits received lining with stone or clay, making them more secure. Others did not. Between an unlined cesspit and a well 15 paces away stands no barrier. Only gravel and earth exist,
and water percolates through it gradually and invisibly downward, transporting exactly what logic would predict. Here is the mechanism. Here is the entire explanation for the question posed in this account's title. Londoners were not dying from the river or from noxious emanations. Many were dying from the spacing between their privy and their water source, and that spacing was determined by individuals unaware it mattered. Yet communities began to sense it the way societies understand things long before knowledge arrives. Within 100 years or so, London would create explicit regulations requiring that cesspits near another's property be sealed, and establishing the precise footage of earth that must separate your sewage from your neighbor's boundary. Residents took one another to civic courts over seeping pits, a privy constructed against a common wall, a refuse heap positioned where rain would carry its contents. Municipal documents even recorded a London resident who broke through rotted boards and ground in the pit below, a detail that settles into memory permanently. Yet those regulations reveal their true purpose. They concerned smell, offensiveness, damage to someone else's holdings, not disease, since nobody could establish the connection between pit and well and death. They solved the problem they could detect, and by fortune, sometimes they solved the problem that was destroying them. This brings us to what makes medieval water truly peculiar, far stranger than simple filth. These were not thoughtless or uncaring individuals. They were clever, perceptive, conscientious people struggling with faulty understanding. Nobody in 1180 comprehends that microscopic organisms exist. That knowledge awaits 5 centuries, along with optical instruments powerful enough to reveal them. Instead, they possessed a serious, sophisticated, yet profoundly incorrect model of disease transmitted through the ancient world and taught in every European medical institution.
Sickness results from imbalance in the body's 4 humors and from tainted atmosphere, from noxious air rising from marshes, refuse heaps, and stagnant water, entering the body and corrupting it. Observe how precisely this theory aligns with observation. Where originates the foul odor? From manure, standing water, and blocked waterways. Where does illness emerge? Frequently from those identical locations. The theory pointed to the correct sources for entirely incorrect reasoning, which explains its persistence for 2,000 years. If you avoid putrid water, you generally avoid dangerous water, though you remain unaware of why. So how did an 1180 Londoner assess whether water was safe? Through observation and a systematic method that would rival modern practice. Water should be transparent, not murky. It should lack odor. It should taste like nothing, because taste signals contamination. It should be cold, indicating depth or a spring source rather than surface exposure. Most importantly, it should flow, since moving water inspired confidence, while stagnant water provoked fear. That instinct approaches perfection. Spring water from elevated terrain was ideal. Deep, sealed wells were excellent. River water taken midstream at the correct tidal moment was tolerable. Water from ponds, ditches, puddles, or sluggish streams near settlements was understood to be hazardous and consumed only by the desperate. Each assessment, by contemporary scientific understanding, is fundamentally sound. From centuries of witnessing who survived and who perished, they constructed a working framework for water safety that was accurate about nearly everything except the underlying mechanism. When the system failed, death came silently, ordinarily, relentlessly. Few illnesses received dramatic terminology. There was the flux and the bloody flux, their label for the condition that empties a body from within, what would later be distinguished as dysentery, typhoid, and numerous waterborne intestinal infections. It started with cramps and exhaustion. Then followed the expulsion of all ingested matter for extended periods, accompanied by rapid loss of bodily fluids faster than they could be replenished. In a world lacking understanding of fluid replacement, with no clean beverages available, and a medical establishment that addressed fever through bloodletting and aggressive purging, treatment frequently worsened the descent already underway. Adults with vigor usually recovered. Elders typically did not. Infants, toddlers, and young children succumbed in numbers that remain profoundly difficult to contemplate. In a medieval settlement, roughly 1 child in 5 failed to reach their first anniversary, and approximately 1 in 3 or 4 never reached maturity. Though multiple factors contributed to this, a substantial portion originated from a bucket. This mortality possessed a pattern, one detail that has always affected me most profoundly. It was not winter's cold and scarcity that claimed them. It was summer. The most pleasant season brought the highest child mortality. Consider what happens to water levels during a hot, dry August. Wells become depleted and tap the filthiest lower layers. Rivers diminish, losing their cleansing flow. Temperature accelerates reproduction in cesspits and manure heaps. Insects breed in astronomical numbers and travel between both. No window in London carried glass to block them. Children experienced greatest thirst and consumed most during weeks when their drinking water was most contaminated. So while historical accounts emphasized winter famines and remembered plagues, a medieval city's steady yearly toll was harvested in sunshine, those summer evenings when young Londoners walked out to Clerkenwell seeking fresh water and pleasant air. Both facts held true simultaneously, and understanding this world requires holding them together. Now let us examine the people who transported this water upon their backs as their occupation. Water weighs far more than most comprehend until they move it substantial distances. Picture a house with 6 people living under one roof. They need water to drink, to cook with, to heat up for the stew pot over the fire, to wash their hands and faces and their clothing, to give to the animals outside, and if the housewife is a brewer, for that work too. Add it all together fairly, and you're counting dozens of gallons that must be drawn from the well every single day. Every drop of it hauled up by someone's effort and carried in buckets, sometimes down lanes, sometimes climbing stairs. 2 buckets on a shoulder pole can weigh 40 or 50 pounds of unwieldy, sloshing burden. And tomorrow you do it again, and the day after that, and for as long as you live. This isn't a quick errand. It stands as one of the heaviest physical demands in a medieval household's daily life, and most of the time, it falls to the women and the growing children. When dawn breaks, and again as evening comes, London's streets fill with people moving water, and not 1 gallon of it arrives without someone paying the price in muscle and exhaustion. That's exactly why no well was merely a well. It became the neighborhood's gathering point, its informal news board, its court. If you wanted to find where the women on a medieval street shared news of each other, decided what they thought about their neighbors, arranged who would marry whom, warned each other about a man to watch, or figured out who was struggling, you'd go to the well. In the line, holding a bucket, morning and evening, every single day. It's one of the rare places this world offered where ordinary women came together in public as a regular thing, and the weight of that role was enormous. But where people gather, conflict follows too. Who takes their turn first? Did someone's bucket break the rope? Are children tossing objects down the opening? Have animals been drunk from the human water trough? A well belonged to the neighborhood collectively, in a time when people took customs seriously. The records from medieval English towns are full of arguments over water, over who gets it, how to reach it, whether someone blocked the path to it or built too near it. Water wasn't just liquid here. It was a right, and rights were worth fighting about. Those who had the means didn't carry it themselves. They hired someone to do it, and that someone had a trade. The water carrier stands among the medieval city's most unsung professions. A man with a wooden pole across his shoulders, holding a large vessel, walking the same path each day from the river or a dependable well back through the lanes to customers who could pay a penny. Later on, these workers would become so numerous and organized in London that they'd have their own guild with a patron saint and their own rules and a recognized place in the city's life. But in 1180, they're simply the strongest men around, selling the one thing everyone requires and nobody can live without. Think about what this tells us. If water in London had been poisonous and unfit, nobody would have paid for it. Men earned their living bringing water to Londoners because Londoners actually drank it and bought it. The market itself proves the old story wrong. Now let's talk about ale, and let's put it where it really belongs, which is significant, just not where the myth suggests. In 1180, ale is everywhere. Most households brew it themselves, and it's usually women making it, turning malted grain with water and whatever herbs appeal to them. Hops haven't yet arrived in England in real amounts. The result is murky, thick, a bit sweet, and it spoils in a few days. So brewing never stops, and it's always consumed fresh. There's strong ale for celebrations, and for men looking for a genuine effect, and there's weak, thin, small ale, barely strong, that people down from morning to night, children included from a tender age. Here's what matters for this story. Ale was safe. Nobody knew about germs, but brewing creates safety. You heat the water together with the malt, you boil it, then let it transform through fermentation into something with a modest amount of alcohol. The boiling especially kills the very things in water that were destroying people. So the medieval world stumbled into a way of drinking water that couldn't harm it, several centuries before anybody had any real understanding of why. But people didn't choose ale out of fear. They chose it as food. This is the shift that changes everything. Ale in this time functions as liquid grain. It's calories, and calories are what a body doing hard work constantly runs short on. It comes from grain. It tastes sweet. It fills you. It warms you. It's something you can enjoy together with others, and in a world where meals meant porridge and rough bread, where taste was rare and hard to come by, ale brought flavor. A worker drinking ale from morning till night wasn't fleeing from water in terror. He was eating. That's why the town watched the price and amount of ale so carefully. That's why the ruler would make ale prices a legal matter based on grain cost. That's why cutting corners on strength or quantity counted as real wrongdoing. Ale was essential the same way bread was. Water simply sat there, cost nothing, was always within reach, and got drunk as a given. Which is precisely why it hardly shows up in written records, and precisely why readers misreading those records figured nobody touched it at all. The wealthy had a third choice, and it arrived by ship. Wine, in barrels. In 1180, England belongs to the Angevin domain, with its centre in France, and wine from Normandy, Anjou, and Poitou flows into London in impressive quantity, landing at the docks along the western shore in the district still called for that trade, the Vintry. Wine costs serious money. It marks someone as having status. The nobles drink it, the top clergy, the rich merchants, and anyone holding a celebration. It often arrives diluted in a cup, which shows sophistication, not watering down. It's simply how you properly drank it. Doing this without knowing it, they were actually making the water safer, because wine is mildly dangerous to the things that foul bad water. Travelers did something rougher. They'd carry a little vinegar or sour wine to put in whatever water they found on the street. Rome's army had done the same thing. It worked. Nobody could explain it, because the smart men of the time had spent considerable thought on water, and their direction shows them getting it right by total accident. Medicine in the 1200s ran on the theory of humours. In that view, water is cold and damp, which makes it something to question putting into a body that must stay hot and balanced. The physicians of the great medical school in Salerno, whose writings on living well spread all through Europe in these very years, drew from Greek and Arabic authorities to tell you to be mindful. Stay away from water that's still, or from wetlands, or lukewarm, or that stinks. Select running water, a well from underground, or rain collected cleanly. Drink it cold instead of tepid. Mix it with wine. And if the water seems off, boil it first and wait for it to cool. Look at that list again. Every instruction in it is genuinely right. Boiling uncertain water is the single strongest health action available before modern times. Yet it was recorded and shared and taught for centuries, defended entirely by a theory of imbalances and spirits that doesn't hold up. The medieval people possessed the answer and the completely wrong reason for why it worked. But in England, there was one group that didn't need to guess: the monks. A monastery is a body of men staying permanently in a single location, driven by faith to practice cleanliness, rich enough to construct using stone, and staffed with people trained in how ancient builders moved water. While London dragged its water up from underground in buckets, monasteries engineered water systems. The greatest surviving instance is at Canterbury's Cathedral Priory, created just before our moment in the middle decades of the 1200s by a leader called Wibbert. He managed spring water from higher terrain past the city limits, transported it significant distances inside lead channels, passed it through stages of holding pools and filtering arrangements to lose the dirt, then brought it to the priory, where it fed a central water basin, served the cooking spaces and the alehouse and the bathing room, flushed the waste rooms, and kept circulating. We have all these details because someone documented it. A drawn and colored map of the complete setup, each pipe and every tank, still exists. Let that land on you, because it transforms the way you see this entire story. When a London young person could perish from a well sitting only 15 steps from a cesspool, Canterbury's monks possessed clean, flowing spring water at their taps, caught and made pure, and used that very flow to clear their waste away. The know-how was there, the engineering was there, the resources existed. What was absent was any reason for someone to spend that kind of wealth on 25,000 regular people in the city, because no one saw that the water was deadly, and because the ones it was killing had zero voice in making demands. That's what the real issue was. Never really ignorance about how to transport clean water. It was a matter of whether anyone thought it was worth doing for. If that strikes you as sharp and strange in today's time, where hundreds of millions of people still consume water that will sicken them while the solutions sit in every schoolbook and engineer's manual, then you've grasped what this account is really saying. So in 1180, water in London had already split by who had money, like almost everything else. A prosperous merchant or a prominent family owns a well on their land, dug deep and constructed well and looked after by people who bring water to them. If the water seems questionable, they send someone beyond the city's edge for something superior, or they simply take ale and wine instead. A household with comfort boils its water and has the means to be selective. The poor take what's nearby, because the other option means an hour's journey to Clerkenwell morning and evening, carrying that £50 while there's actual labour waiting and kids who need watching. And nobody in that spot has an hour. Those residing beside the leather workshops and the butcher yards and the filthy sections of the Walbrook stream, of course they're the poorest residents, because that's consistently where cheap housing stands. So sickness arrived precisely where it constantly has, on those with the least defense. The cool, clean water from the distant spring theoretically belonged to anybody. In reality, it was only for those with time and staff to fetch it. There's almost something touching about being present in 1180, because the city is only a couple lifetimes away from making a genuine shift. A little over 50 years from this moment, London makes its move. The city claims the spring sites at Tyburn, out in the rural areas to the west, in what's now Marylebone and Mayfair, and lays lead pipes across the distance and under waterways and under roads all the way to the city centre, feeding a grand stone vessel in Cheapside topped by a public outlet where anyone could walk over and fill a pail. They would name it the Great Conduit, and it would become one of the most treasured assets that medieval London possessed, maintained, expanded, and honoured across generations, with additional conduits eventually following. But that time had not yet arrived for the people we have been observing this day. In the year 1180, Londoners were among the last inhabitants of a city that relied solely on wells, small streams, and the river flowing beneath their feet. Only the oldest of the children we stand beside would live to witness fresh water arriving through a pipe from Tyburn. These young people stand at the threshold of an era about to vanish forever, though they cannot perceive it. What explanation could they have possibly formed when a violent sickness swept through a lane in August and claimed 2 young lives from a single household? They did not direct their thoughts toward the well. Instead, they contemplated the air itself, thick, foul, and oppressive in the summer heat. They considered what educated people genuinely believed at that time, that the positions of celestial bodies possessed the power to poison an entire region's atmosphere. They pondered the body's inner equilibrium. Had the child been exposed to excessive heat, or consumed unripe food, or caught a chill after physical exertion? Most significantly, in a culture thoroughly centered on faith, they regarded God, transgression, and the possibility that this represented divine punishment, divine examination, or simply God's inscrutable will. They sought divine intervention. They prayed. They made offerings. They journeyed to holy shrines or purchased candles or immersed cloth in water from sacred wells. The wells themselves were considered holy precisely because their water possessed beneficial properties, and this quality and the saint's blessing represented the same reality perceived from opposite angles. Reflect on the act of laying a child to rest while following every practice your civilization prescribed with total commitment and devotion, yet experiencing no benefit, all because the remedy existed merely 15 paces away. No person living could have recognized it. This represents the deepest tragedy of the medieval water crisis, not the contamination itself, but its concealment. This phenomenon was not restricted to one city. Degraded water represented an imperceptible threat to all of medieval society. Its deadliest consequences emerged on the battlefield. Soldiers perished from intestinal disease far more frequently than from combat wounds. Position 5,000 warriors in a camp adjacent to a besieged settlement for 2 months during warm weather with no sanitation measures, consuming from a river they simultaneously contaminate, and the military force will progressively empty itself of personnel in ways no opposing army could accomplish. Military campaigns collapsed. Strategic operations were halted. Monarchs, nobility, and powerful figures succumbed within their own encampments, while the most knowledgeable healers of the era attended them. Historical records documented these deaths as dysentery, fever, or plague transmitted by divine will, then proceeded onward. The identical danger pursued the spiritual traveler along the pilgrimage route, consuming from an unknown stream, the merchant in unfamiliar territory, the masses assembling for festivals. Whenever medieval populations gathered substantially, water extracted its toll. If one seeks the single deadliest force in that world besides starvation, it was not the sword. It was a single drink from a water source on a scorching afternoon. Water possessed multiple essential functions in that year. A single vessel served countless purposes. Laundry, boiling with ashes and alkali, pounded and rinsed at riverbanks or streams, an exhausting task performed by household women. Bathing, more frequent than popular narratives suggest, face and hands received daily attention, and complete washing occurred when feasible. Livestock in farmyards, mortar for construction and cooling troughs for metalworkers, and urban defense against a menace perceived as exceeding illness itself, conflagration. A city of wooden structures and grass roofs, densely packed, could vanish several entire streets in a single afternoon. The sole technique was coordinated effort, containers and hands passing fluid from the nearest water source through lines of neighbors. Municipal authorities would soon mandate that residents maintain a full reservoir beside their dwellings throughout the arid season. That tank served no drinking purpose. It existed because an ignition spark in the 7th month could consume an entire district. Water represented the material substance around which the entire settlement was organized, transported by human effort in a location where nobody possessed the capability to render it harmless. Before concluding, consider the aspect that tends to disappear through repeated retellings. Nothing about this was specifically characteristic of that historical period. It was not an inadequacy of the era itself. It reflected the consequences of crowding. A household collecting from a spring higher up a slope, or a modest settlement with a substantial well and designated disposal locations positioned downhill could consume perfectly wholesome water for centuries. Rural inhabitants regularly enjoyed superior health outcomes compared to urban residents for precisely this reason. The failure occurred at scale. Position 25,000 individuals within protective walls alongside their latrines, livestock, leatherworking facilities, slaughterhouses, and decomposing remains, situated upon earth through which moisture travels, and you have constructed a system that systematically transforms communal waste into communal consumption. Every civilization accumulating substantial populations has encountered this identical obstacle. Those that resolved it
The Romans, employing aqueducts, monastic communities constructing pipelines, did so by traveling considerable distances beyond inhabited areas to access water that no population had yet damaged.
The settlement of 1180 possessed no such solution. It persisted in consuming from the terrain beneath itself. Regarding the timeline for genuine comprehension, nearly 700 years passed. Not until the 1850s, in an urban area that had expanded from 25,000 inhabitants to exceeding 2 million, did a medical professional named John Snow establish proof during a cholera outbreak in a neighborhood called Soho. He charted the deceased location by location until every indication directed toward a singular communal water distribution point on Broad Street. He argued persuasively that the infection originated in the water rather than suspended particles in the atmosphere. He convinced the administrators to deactivate the pump, and the outbreak ceased. Though years would elapse before the scientific establishment concurred with his conclusions. Upon examining that source, they discovered the contaminating source, a waste pit positioned merely several feet away, seeping through the surrounding structure. Contemplate the implications of that discovery. The identical dynamic, a pit positioned beside the source that had been silently destroying the population in 1180, continued destroying inhabitants in 1854. The entirety of that span and one person equipped with mapping tools were necessary before confirming the mechanism. The inhabitants of that earlier year possessed no intellectual deficiency in their inability to perceive it. Their successors failed to comprehend it across another 25 generations. Examine the broader picture. What water signified in that earlier time, stepping beyond narrative into tangible existence? It was neither a dangerous substance everyone rejected in preference for fermented grain beverages. It constituted the essential, daily, indispensable material through which life proceeded, consumed universally, admired when transparent and cold, sought during evening hours for simple pleasure, distributed through every lane by the physical labor of women and youngsters, and quietly, unnoticed, without intention or secret, taking lives every single year, predominantly in sunny weather, predominantly among infants, for reasons nobody alive could comprehend. They implemented every measure their perspective afforded them. They favored flowing sources above stagnant ones. They heated it when uncertain. They transformed it through fermentation into alcoholic beverages and combined it with wine, and dug their sources deeper and constructed their protective barriers higher. They supplicated the divine, insufficient because the answer resided in a realm that their fundamental conception of existence simply could not accommodate. This brings us finally to the least extraordinary apparatus in your residence. Activate your fixture this evening and observe the fluid streaming forth. That substance has originated from a guarded location, undergone purification processes, received examination for characteristics that would have surpassed medieval healers' comprehension, and flows to you via force at unlimited volume during any period, in varying degrees of temperature, for a monetary exchange so minimal you have never once contemplated its cost. You can deliver it to your offspring with absolute confidence. No ruler of that earlier period, no ecclesiastical figure, no monastic figure directing the most sophisticated water systems in that realm possessed anything resembling it. What you acquired without conscious consideration represents, when positioned against the entire chronicle of human existence, something unparalleled in luxury. The singular greatest asset you possess, and the circumstance through which your offspring will virtually certainly achieve maturity beyond infancy. Every instance you fill a container without deliberation, You execute something that would have appeared to an 1180 inhabitant as a supernatural event conducted casually at 3 in the morning in darkness while returning to sleep. I extend my appreciation for traversing medieval lanes alongside me. And when you activate your fixture next and water emerges from your wall, recognize that for nearly all humans who have previously inhabited this world, that mechanism represented the distinction between continuation of your family and their burial.